Okay, so today we're going to make a simple zipped pouch like this one here. This is made out of silver faux leather with a blue zip, and then inside I've put some jazzy lining fabric because I quite like it to be fun on the inside as well as the outside. So what are we going to need? First off, we're going to need 2 pieces of fabric for the outside of our project. So I'm going to use the faux leather again, and I've cut this to 10 inches by 8 inches because I'm going to use this pouch to put my mini iPad in. I'm also going to need 2 pieces of lining fabric. So I've chosen this nice spotty number. I think that'll look quite nice on the inside. And then we're going to need a zip. And for today, I've got an orange. So this is a plastic coil zip, and it's way longer than we need, but that's not a problem because we can make the zip shorter. It's really easy to shorten a zip, so if you're ever a bit unsure about what size zip to get, and it's a plastic zip, just make sure you get one longer than you need because you can always shorten it down. If we were wanting to make a pouch using a metal zip with a stopper either end, or even a shorter coil zip, recognising the stopper at the start and at the end, then what we would need to do is make sure that the opening of our zip, that's the length from stopper to stopper, is the size that we need for our pouch. And then we'd cut our fabric to the length of the zip, including these little bits at the end. So when you're buying a zip, the length of your zip is stopper to stopper, and not the actual length of the tape. Okay, so to start our project, we're going to take our piece of lining fabric. So I'm going to put my jazzy spots down, and then we're going to take the zip. So the lining fabric is right side up, and we are going to place the zip on top so it is also right side up, so I can really clearly see the ridge of the zip, and those top edges are more or less matched. Then I'm going to take my piece of faux leather, and that's going to go on top right side down. So what we've got now is the lining fabric right side up, the zip right side up, and this faux leather right side down. Now, faux leather or oilcloth plastic or real leather, if you're going to put a pin through it, it's going to pierce a hole in it. So I'm not actually going to use pins, I'm going to use patchwork clips to anchor this all in place. So I'm just going to put clips down the zip like this, and I'm making sure that my side edges of my 2 pieces of fabric are also in line. So to double check, at the top we've got all 3 edges matching, and then we've got to make sure that our side edges are matching as well. Okay, so we've come over to the machine, and I've already loaded my zipper foot onto the machine, and I have my needle coming down to the left of the zipper foot. So I'm going to just take off the first patchwork clip in order to get myself lined up, and I'm just going to move that zip head out of the way. So by having the zip head overhanging the edge of my project, it's really handy because I can take that out of the way straight away, and it's not going to interfere with where I am going to be sewing. If your zip is shorter, you may have to move your zip as you sew. So lining it up, the edge of my presser foot is right next to the ridge of the zip, and I'm just going to do a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to reverse back. Okay, and then I'm going to take this all the way down, moving my clips as I go. I can feel the ridge with my fingers, even through the faux leather, so I know I can keep my zip and my fabric in the right place. And when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to do a couple of reverse stitches as well. Just going to cut that free. And there we can see the zip has gone in. Okay then, so our zip is now inserted on one side, and if I just bring this a bit closer, you can see that I have inserted my fabric quite close to my zip, but you might like to leave a slightly bigger gap. It's entirely up to you. So we now have to insert or attach the fabric to the other side of the zip. So we're going to start by putting our spotty fabric, so our lining fabric down, right side up. Then we're going to put our zip on top, right side up, matching up the top edge and just checking that everything's okay at the sides. And then we're going to pop our outside fabric, so my faux leather, right side down. And then we're just going to clip that at the top again. So 1, 2, about 4 clips is plenty for this size. So remember, this was a 10-inch wide by an 8-inch tall. So that's not looking quite right over here. So I'm just going to sort that out and reclip. Now sometimes you can't see what's been going on with the fabric on the underneath side. So at this stage it can be really good just to flip it over and check that everything's okay. And you can see just here that I've caught the fabric in my clip. So I'm just going to smooth that out and just bring that up as well, just to make sure that everything's really nicely lined up, ready to sew. So again, just to recap, we've got our outside fabric right side down on top of our zip, which is facing up, and the fabric for the lining is right side up underneath that. And I'm just going to stitch that in place. Okay, so we're back at the sewing machine and we're all lined up, ready to go. The coil, the ridge of my zip is next to the left hand side of my presser foot, and I'm all ready to go. So I'm going to start sewing. Backward a few stitches, and then take my clips out of the bottom. Now, if I had been using a zip where my zipper head was inside the length of the fabric, what you would need to do is pause at a point coming down your seam with your needle in, lift your foot, and then lift the fabric up and push the zip head back up to pass by where the needle is. It's really simple. It can be a little bit fiddly to get the zip head to go. My top trick is always to make sure that your zip, when you're sewing, has got the tag to the top of the zip head. It's just slightly easier for some reason. Okay, so mine's all finished. Just going to take the needle out of the fabric and put it out to the side and cut it free. Let's take a look. Okay, so my zip is now inserted, nicely centred down the centre of the space, nicely straight, and always do a check. My zip opens with ease. Now sometimes the lining fabric can be a little bit, can roll a little bit too close to the inside edge of your zip. So it's quite nice sometimes to top stitch your fabric away from the zip teeth. Now it's quite common to see purses where it has been top stitched through from the outside all the way through to the inside, but you might not want to do this because you might not want to spoil the outside lining, outside fabric, or you might not feel confident enough that you're going to give it a really good finish, but you still need to make sure that that inside lining is going to stay away from the zip. So don't worry about top stitching through from the outside to the inside. Just take your fabric, so let me just do the zip back up, come onto the inside layer of your pouch, and then you're going to push the 2 layers of the outside and 1 lining layer to the left, keeping just your 1 lining layer and your zip and the seam allowance to the right. And then we're going to stitch down there, just anchoring those together. So in dressmaking, this would be like understitching, but it's just going to keep the fabric away from getting caught in the zip, but not mean that I have to put holes all down my leatherette. So for this top stitching, I've put my normal foot back onto my sewing machine, and my top stitching tricks are one, to make sure you've got a nice long stitch length because it looks better, and two, to have the line that you're following lined up with the centre of your presser foot. So I'm not sure how well that will come out for you, but I've lined the centre of my presser foot up with the join between the orange and the navy blue. And then I've moved my needle over to the right a couple of movements so that my needle is now off centre to the right. And as I stitch down here, I can clearly line up the most visible thing with the centre of my foot, and my stitching should stay nicely spaced all the way down. And as I sew down here, I'm just making sure that I'm pushing this lining away from the zip. So it's not going to get caught. And I'll just pull that out. You can see, hopefully, that there's now a nice row of stitching coming down to the right hand side of the zip. And I'll repeat that for the other side. So at this stage, I've now got my lining top stitched down onto my zip to keep it away so it won't hinder the zip opening. I've got the top of my pouch with no top stitching because I don't want to have any stitching going through my faux leather. And I've trimmed away all of the loose threads that might be hanging away at the top of the project. So the next step is to open your zip. Whatever you do, don't forget to open your zip so it's within the body of the fabric. And now we're going to bring the outside pieces of our fabric together and the inside pieces of our fabric together. So I tend to lay it out like this. So I've got my two pieces of lining right sides together over here, and I've got my two pieces of outside fabric, my faux leather, right sides together over here. So now I'm going to clip all the way around my project, marking an opening in the bottom of the lining which will allow me to turn it through. I'm going to use patchwork clips. Oh, that one's broken. Things happen, never mind. I'm going to use patchwork clips on the leather, or faux leather. And making a pouch out of faux leather is really easy, but it makes it look really snazzy. And then on the fabric, I'm just going to carry on using my clips for a moment. So I'm going to match these edges up really well. Oops, can't get them out of the box. And then just to be a reminder to stop sewing, I'm going to put a pin in there and a pin in there, and that's going to be my opening. Now, what do you do about the zip? What you need to do is make sure that when you stitch, the zip coil, so the right side of the zip, is facing the outside of your pouch. So at this end, down here, where it's joined, it's really easy. You can just fold the zip back on itself and put an extra clip in place to hold it for you, which you will obviously have to take out when you get there. As that is all in the seam allowance, I could actually put a pin through there. So let's just see if I can get a pin to go all the way through the leather as well as the zip and hold it in place. Yeah, just. Okay. Then at the other end, the zip is floating because the zip is open. And it's now really, really important that you get those ends to match up so they're completely level. And again, pin. You really don't want this bit to be able to move as you're stitching. Okay. So, what are we going to do next? We're going to sew all of the sides of our project together, but we're not going to sew through the pin gap. And I'm a firm believer in sewing each side of the project separately. So if I just twist it around, I'm going to start up here, do a bit of reversing, sew across and reverse when I get to the end. I'll then cut it out of my machine and then I will come down this direction, sewing with reversing, sewing all the way down, going over the top of my zip until I get down to the bottom and reversing again at the bottom. Then I would take it out of the machine, twist it round and do the same on each side. So that each side of your project is a separate seam with reversing at the beginning and at the end. I like to do this because I think it makes the project stronger on the corners. If you just go to the corner and pivot, you've just got one stitch basically holding that in place. And pouches like this get used an awful lot, and I think that the seams need to be stronger than just one stitch. So by crossing your seams over, you're giving a lot more strength to those corner points where they're going to get a lot of abuse. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm now going to sew all the way around the pouch, and I'm starting at my first pin, and I've put my normal presser foot back on. I've centered my needle back up, and I'm going to line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of the presser foot so that that's going to be my seam allowance all the way around. So I'm going to start with 2 stitches, reverse, and then sew down. Get to the bottom, cut it out, reposition and come down again. Now this is a plastic zip, so the machine will go over it. I'm just making sure that these 2 bits are held in place, taking the pin out because I don't want that to interfere, and I'm just going to ease it very gently underneath the presser. There we go, and then we'll just carry on all the way down to the bottom. And we'll do that all the way around. Okay, so we've sewn all the way around, leaving the gap here between our 2 pins. So I'm just going to show you one of my other little tricks that I do. So when you're sewing things, when you've turned things through and you're sewing the opening shut, it can be a real fiddle to get your seams to match up really nicely so that it's hard to see where the join ever was. A trick that I've got to show you today is we're going to fold back before we turn through the seam allowance along the edge where we've got our opening. Okay, so I'm just going to finger press that first, and then I've got one of these little irons and I'm just going to run that across the top of it as well. So all I'm doing is pressing back the seam allowance all the way along that opening and into the rest of the seam. So that's that side. Just going to take those pins out so I don't hurt myself on them, and then I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm just going to press it from this side as well, and you'll see straight away the benefit of this because you're creating a really nice pressed seam line that you can then sew together. Okay, so you can see I've got 2 really neatly pressed seam edges there. Okay, so almost ready to turn through. What we're going to do before we do turn through is cut off the ends of our zip. So down at this end, just give it a little trim, and at this end, give it a little trim as well. Now, if you're thrifty like me, you can put a zip head on that, and that's about 8 inches of zip length, so I could get another little zip out of that. So I'll pop that to one side. Because this is faux leather and it's a bit stiff, I'm also just going to trim off a teeny tiny bit across the diagonal on all the corners down there. I'm just going to trim off my threads up there because it's really messy. And now I'm going to pop my hand inside through the zip that I left open. I'm going to squish all that into the middle and then pull it all through. That's going to look really nice. So when your pouch is pulled through like this, what you need to do before you sew it shut is make sure that all of your corners are beautifully pressed out. Because once you've sewn it shut, you can't get your hand or pair of scissors down inside to just push through these corners. So I'm just going to do that now. Using a pair of scissors just to help me get that corner out. And you can feel the bits inside. Always be careful when you're using scissors that you don't end up pushing through more than you bargained for. I think I'm happy with that. So now you can see I've got these two beautifully lined up edges, and I'm just going to pin those together before I start sewing them. So let's just put a couple of pins in. So when I'm stitching shut openings like this, I make sure that I'm all lined up and really happy with my position. I do put the needle in the fabric first just to check that it's exactly where I want it to be. And then I hold my fabric so it's a little bit taut, so I'm holding it at the back and at the front. And I'm just going to do a couple of stitches, reverse back, and then stitch down. And just by holding it front and back, it just helps you keep it really nice and straight. I could of course be doing this in the lovely navy blue thread, and then it wouldn't hardly show at all. And there we go. Pull that up and snip it. Okay, so once you've sewn your opening shut, just trim all your threads off, and then we're going to push that lining down inside of our purse. Push out this upper edge here where the zip is. Push it way down inside. Now I can't press this because it's faux leather. I could press it by having an ironing cloth over the top, but I'm a big fan of hand and finger pressing anyway, because sometimes when you press things it almost presses the life out of them. So I'm just making sure that everything is pushed into exactly where I want it. And there we go, I have a nice zip pouch with my little snazzy orange zipper that freely opens, and inside I've got my nice jazzy lining. And I made this little zip pouch to put my to store my iPad inside, and let's just see if it works. Fits perfectly. How about that? I hope you've had fun making this with me. Thanks. Aoife. There she is.